This was to be the story, not unlike any other, about what was to be a typical holiday weekend. Friday, September 13th. A group of teenagers getting together to spend their last weekend together before heading off to different colleges. Tommy Larson, along with the gang, loaded up their camping gear, swimsuits, and enough beer to break the laws in 3 counties, and went to spend the weekend at the lake. That evening, they made a campfire and coupled up. Unfortunately, Tommy was the one odd man out, so he decided to take a night swim and cool off a bit. The water felt good enough that his buzz was fading, so he decided to swim out a bit farther to get away from the noisy group. He felt something brush against his foot, a fish maybe. Deciding he may be out a bit too far, he turned back. But this time, what he felt was a large hand grabbing him. As Tommy tried to fight and release himself, another gripped him, and a dark form rose up around him, wrapping him in his grip, dunking him down several times while he thrashed about. Tommy had water in his throat and couldn't call for help. The large figure seemed unaffected by the water as they both sank down to the bottom of the murky lake, a place it had called home for decades. It was a visit from which Tommy would never return from alive. It seemed the rowdy bunch of kids had made too much noise and had awakened a monster most had willingly forgotten about, made into an urban legend that this new generation didn't believe in yet. So while they drank, laughed, and made moves on each other, none noticed that Tommy had been gone for so long, or a massive figure wearing a hockey mask rose up from the shore and headed into the trees to bide its time. That morning, the sheriff was called out to the lake. They had found Tommy's body washed up, bloated, and covered in muck from the lake bottom. The kids admitted Tommy had some beers. They had already hidden their stash. And the coroner said it's likely he got drunk, was disoriented, and simply drowned in the dark. The kids were warned that the deputy would stop by throughout the evening to keep an eye on the group. But the sheriff had no reason to go out and search the forest, and he had other things to do in town. When the sun began to set on Crystal Lake, a lone figure made its way out of the trees. He'd spent the day finding a long piece of metal and honing a blade edge to it. The light grew dim as Jason came lumbering into the campground area. At first, some kids who spotted him thought it was a joke. Some dressed up in a boogeyman costume to try and scare the girls. They should have went with their gut instinct and ran. Instead, these modern liberated women felt empowered and, rather than be afraid, picked up wood branches and taunted the brute, thinking they had a chance of being the scary ones. It stood there as they approached, and one of the girls got close enough and whacked him with a branch, breaking it over his hockey-masked head to no effect. Jason wasted no time and swung his self-fashioned machete and nearly cleaved Jennifer Carlson, 19 years old and would get no older, nearly in two. She never knew what hit her, but the others did. Suddenly, this was no game to them, and they ran screaming, alerting the rest of what happened and what was now stalking them. The stories, the urban legends, were all true, and they may all die. Lori stood there as one of the jocks, Toby Lindemeyer, a varsity lineman and 6'3" of all muscle, decided he could take the guy and side-charged him, knocking him down. Toby began kicking him, hoping to break some ribs, but Jason grabbed his leg and toppled him. Then he rolled over and shoved his blade through Toby's body. Toby emitted a blood-gurgling gasp before dying. Jason stood up, looking for his next victim. Toby's sacrifice was just enough to give the others a chance to make it to their vehicles and escape the campground, hightailing it to town to tell the sheriff a story he neither wanted to hear or believe. The next morning is where I came in. A multiple homicide in a small country community is always worth a wire service coverage. I made it out there before the bodies had been removed. The sheriff was being very tight-lipped on details and suspects, but told me they're considering it the work of a convict from the state pen who escaped 2 nights ago. They'll be closing the lake, but are sure the suspect has already fled the area. I've worked long enough to know a cover story when I hear one. I went back to town to do some research. Libraries, local circulars, barber shops, any place where people may talk or know things. They told me of the killings in the 70s and again in the 80s. Of a homicidal maniac killing teens and then disappearing. A researcher of native history said that the land was considered cursed by evil spirits that the tribe had left alone. But it was disturbed when someone started mining for copper near the lake back in the 1880s. Deaths and disasters closed the mine, but it's still out there. As the sun went down, I made my way back to the campground to find my story. I was greeted by 2 other men who also had managed to skirt around the police barriers back at the road. They had brought shotguns and said that they had lost a family member to whatever is out here back in the day. From the smell in their breath, I could tell they consumed plenty of liquid courage to come out here and challenge a nightmare. They invited me to join them, but I said no. I was in enough danger as it is, and besides, this thing will be looking for me, so I just need to sit tight and wait. And it didn't take too long. First, I heard the gunshots. It was followed by screams of fear and then pain. I knew bullets were no match for a force of evil, and neither were they. After dispatching the men, Voorhees made his way back to the campsite in search of me. I started to slowly walk around, hoping to spot it before it spotted me. I'd had only a little time to think of a plan to keep from being the next chapter of this grisly tale. If I could lead it to the mine, maybe there's something there that once held it and could do so again. But I was just grasping at straws here. I was lucky for a minute. I spotted him at the edge of the campground, and I ducked down to keep from being seen. He had been searching around the campfire, looking for anyone hiding to bludgeon. I figured I had one chance to take a decent picture of it, either for my own story or for evidence of what killed me. But that was when my luck ran out. The stupid flash unit my camera uses made that buzzing sound, letting me know the battery was low and where I was to the creature. He turned toward me and moved closer. My reporter's instinct overrode survival, and I took a quick picture of it, point-blank range. The flash setting was too high. Any image would be washed out, but it did have the effect of temporarily blinding Jason, giving me enough time to stand up and run away. I made my way through the paths, stumbling, running into branches, trying to make sure I was headed the right way and not hopelessly lost or turned around heading into Jason. But Voorhees had the advantage here. It knew the ways around the land, and even walking could make its way pretty fast, so I stayed only a few steps ahead mostly. I wondered why the police never came in after the shots. I decided they were there to keep anything in. I made it to the opening of the old mine. It looked no safer than being stalked by Jason. I pulled the boards down so I could get inside and used my little flashlight so I could see. Amazingly, there were holes in parts of the ceiling that provided some moonlight and more concern of if I'll ever make it back out again. I worked my way into the shafts, watching where I stepped, seeing signs of warning of collapsed shafts, dangers, all while trying to remember which way I was going so I could find my way out. All the while, Jason was behind me, step by step, reminding me I somehow had to get around him to make my exit. So far, nothing in the mine was having any effect on him. I may have made a very big and fatal mistake. It wasn't working. I'll have to try something else. I rounded a corner and saw a long shaft. I found a natural alcove hewn into the wall side, big enough I could hide in. So I threw a large rock down the shaft to make noise and disturb the dust, then ducked in. Jason saw the disturbance and took the bait. He lumbered past me and headed down the shaft. I knew this wouldn't last long, and I decided to take a chance and run. When I snuck out behind Voorhees, I nearly tripped over a board and gave myself away. It turned around close enough to get me. In a panic, I tried to grab a board off the wall to hit him with, and it started the whole support structure to the shaft collapsing on top of Voorhees and me. I climbed out of the debris, coughing out dust and trying to see. I still had my flashlight, but I lost my camera and recorder, and almost lost my hat. I crawled forward and found Voorhees' mostly buried body. Just when I thought he was dead, he started moving. I scrambled to get away, just in time, and more of the shaft came down. It took some time and many wrong turns before I made it out of the mine, all of it coming down, sealing it, and I hoped the fate of Jason Voorhees. As I stood there in the dawn's light, I hoped maybe those restless spirits can be content having its monster back in its embrace. Back at camp, the police were waiting, and they took me in. But other than trespassing, they had nothing on me and already had 2 more bodies to deal with. They took my statement, buried it as deep as Jason, and said to leave and keep my mouth shut. They declared a double homicide, a drunken dispute between 2 distraught locals, and then added the kids' deaths in to wrap up both cases. No one in town objected. They all wanted this gone and forgotten again. Vincenzo didn't want my unbelievable story, and made me change it to small-town youth getting drunk and astray, blah, blah, blah. I did it under protest, because I like paying bills and eating. Item: There's a small county in the Midwest that practically overnight had a sizable area of land with a lake declared a protected wildlife refuge, citing several recognized species on the endangered list. Fences were erected, signs posted with fines, and years of imprisonment threatened to any who violated. I'm sure no one will, if they listen to the urban legends. Other than those, only one other thing remains. I was so rattled, I didn't even realize I was holding it until I came out of the mine. It doesn't really prove anything, and I don't know how long I can stand it staring back at me on my desk. But it's enough to make sure I never attend a hockey game. Ever.